Chapter 21. The eastern sky was just beginning to show a hint of gray above the distant sawtooth ridge of the mountain range, far off in the distance, as the dark mass shapes of 20 riders galloped their mounts into the sandy bed of the almost desert-like valley below. 3 riders on the ridge above, off to the right, huddled behind a pile of large boulders and watched with keen interest as Peso Martin, Matt Starr, and the big dollar punchers passed by below. "Darn fools are buying it," the Cyclone kid muttered almost to himself, keeping his voice just low enough to be barely heard by Arapaho Brown and Chief Henry Two Owls. He was pleased by the exuberance and speed of the riders below as they followed hoofprints of 5 galloping horses, clearly visible in the mar light of approaching dawn, leaving an obvious trail across the length of the valley toward a narrow canyon up ahead. The plan was to keep Martin and the others busy wasting time while Kitty had ridden back to Price's ranch to get the money. Cyclone had sent Jeremy with her in case there was trouble. Some of Price's men might have been left behind to guard Price. By the size of the band of riders in the pursuit, Cyclone did not think there could be many left behind. Possibly 2 or 3 at the most. Jeremy and Kitty were competent enough to handle that situation, if necessary. Mostly, though, Cyclone just wanted the 2 youngsters away, just in case Peso Martin and his men would somehow manage to overtake himself and his 2 companions. "We've got them now," Peso Martin shouted, pulling his horse to a halt, hoofs sliding in the loose sand. Matt Starr, beside him, hauled his sorrel into an abrupt halt also. The other men behind him followed suit, pulling their mounts to a halt behind the leaders. Peso was appraising the entrance to the canyon. "What do you mean?" Matt Starr questioned. He was a bit out of breath from the long, arduous ride. "That's a box canyon," Peso chuckled. "There's no way out for them." "You sure they're in there?" Starr queried. "You see their tracks going in, don't you? You see any coming out?" "No, but they are a tricky bunch. You never know what to expect. Maybe they found a way out. Could they have climbed the walls and got out that way? I'm telling you, we got them cornered. Even if they could climb those sheer walls, they'd have to leave their horses behind. On foot, they would know it would only be a matter of time before we caught up with them. No, they're still in there. Come on." He started to urge his horse forward. Matt grabbed Peso's upper arm and pulled back. Peso yanked his horse to a halt. "If you're right," Matt said, "don't you think we ought to take it easy going in there? They're bound to be waiting for us. They've had time to take cover and wait in ambush." "Not if they don't know we're here. They may have just ridden in there and discovered there was no way out." "Oh, I'm sure they know we're here. At least they know we'd be catching up with them." "How would they know that?" "Hell, they left a trail a blind man could see, even in the dark. They're too smart to have made it that obvious," Starr said. "They wanted us to trail them here, and they are waiting to catch us by surprise in the narrow confines of the canyon. Once they start firing at us, it will be difficult to turn our horses around and retreat." "Retreat? Who the hell said anything about retreat? Look around. We got 20 men here. Against 5. 3 old men, a boy and a girl. Believe me, we can handle that." "All right," Matt agreed, "if you believe that. But I do think we'd better be cautious. Maybe we should just wait them out. Maybe they'll get tired of waiting and think we're not coming. Then when they come out, we can grab them by surprise, instead of the other way around. I think it would be a lot safer, and it might prevent unnecessary shooting and bloodshed." "Sounds to me like you're a mite scared to go in after them," Peso jeered. "Think what you like." "Well, I think we ought to go in and get them. Right now." "At least, let us go in on foot," Matt pleaded. "On horseback, we'd get ourselves bottled up if we were ambushed. Might lose a bunch of men trying to get out. Maybe even shoot each other or trample ourselves." Peso thought about it for a moment. "Maybe you're right," he finally agreed. "We'd probably make less noise, and maybe we could even surprise them." He grinned to himself, anticipating a victory. To his men, Peso shouted over his shoulder as he dismounted. Men were going in on foot, Shorty. You, Pete, and Slim stay here and hold the horses. Hee, Cyclone cackled lowly to his companions. This is working out better than I'd hoped for. Matt Starr was not surprised that Peso Martin had sent several of his men into the canyon ahead. Peso was no fool and would protect his own hide first. He even made sure that Starr advanced ahead of him as the men spread out across the widest part of the canyon mouth. Take it slow and easy, Peso called to his men. Advance slowly and make as little noise as possible. Keep a close watch. There's no telling where we're going to find these varmints. Be aware of any place they might be hiding. The trail into the canyon began to narrow quickly as it wound its way through the rocky gorge, and what feeble early dawn light from outside the canyon began to disappear as Martin's men traversed deeper into the canyon. Even in the darkness, the tracks of the Wildcat gang's horses were very visible and easy to follow. Rainwater had seeped in from the open rim above, and the narrow trail was soggy with mud. The men veered off the trail onto the loose shale and gravel close to the canyon walls. After 15 minutes of slow, deliberate advancement, Martin's men, ever ready for a sudden encounter with the outlaws, the muddy floor of the canyon dried up, turning to more loose shale and rock, and the canyon walls quickly pinched together, narrowing to a solid wall of rock and granite before them. Damn, Peso swore, twisting around and looking back the way they had come. They've let us come on by so they could box us in. They're probably waiting back there to pick us off when we try to go back. I should have known better. Maybe not, Matt Starr said. What do you mean, maybe not? Maybe they weren't here after all. You're talking through your hat, Starr. You saw the tracks for yourself. They only went one way, in not out. Yes, but maybe they led their horses back out over the rocky sides of the trail. Maybe they just wanted to throw us off their trail for a while. Just long enough, get far enough away that we couldn't catch up to them. Maybe, Peso ranted. You're just full of maybes, aren't you? I tell you, they're back there, in this canyon, just waiting to plug us all full of holes before we can get out of here. His eyes were glazing over, and Matt Starr could see the man trembling in the ever-growing early morning light that was now beginning to creep into the canyon from the rim opening above. I just don't think the Wildcats are the kind to just shoot us down like that. That's what you think, Peso protested. That girl hates Simon Price so much, she would shoot her own grandmother if she were associated with him. What do you think she'll do to us that work for the old man? Matt didn't answer, but he thought, probably not what you deserve. We didn't see their horses in here, Matt said to Peso. There's no place to hide them. I tell you, they aren't here. Peso thought about it for a moment, then new terror crept into his eyes. Then they are waiting outside the canyon, just to shoot us down when we come out of the canyon. You left men out there with the horses. We would have heard something if the Wildcats had been around. Maybe they are waiting for all of us to be out there, Peso protested, so they can get all us. Now who's talking maybes, Peso? Starr chided. I don't think so, but there is only one way to find out, and that is to go out there. Peso swallowed hard and nodded. I guess you're right about that, but I still think you're wrong about the Wildcats. All right, you men, Peso called to the others. Let's go back. Looks like we've been fooled. They're not here. But be mighty careful when you come out of the canyon. Those Jaspers might just be waiting for us. He stepped aside, near the left side of the canyon, and let his men pass by. Sure, Matt Starr thought to himself. He's going to let them head back along the trail, without even warning them of his suspicions. If Kitty and the others were back there waiting in ambush, which he doubted very much, Peso's men would be first in the line of attack, and while they were being dealt with, maybe Peso could find a way to duck past and run to safety. The trek back along the trail proved to be uneventful, and there had been no attack waiting after all. Matt could see the relief on Peso Martin's face as they emerged from the mouth of the canyon. The perspiration beading down his cheeks glinted in the early morning sun as he stepped out of the canyon into the light. The expression of relief in his face disappeared almost as fast as his face turned grim with utter surprise. Their horses were gone, and the men who had been left behind to tend them were on the ground. They were all trussed up with rope, lying on their bellies with hands tied behind their backs, attached to their ankles. Handkerchiefs were stuffed in their mouths and tied tightly. Obviously, the Wildcats were long gone, and it would be a long trek home on foot for Peso Martin, Matt Starr, and Martin's men. Chapter 22. The sun was halfway up over the distant horizon. Dew still clung to the grassy knoll where Jeremy and Kitty Carlin lie on the ground at the ridge. It was the same vantage point they had taken the night before when they crept up on Simon Price's Big Dollar Ranch. "That's Gus Dewey down there," Jeremy said, keeping his voice low, almost to a whisper. A man in his middle 30s stood just outside the big frame house. The vine-covered rails of the wide porch were just behind him. "Doesn't look like anyone else is around," Jeremy continued. "It's not like Price to keep only one bodyguard around," Kitty said. "There's got to be more." "There were a lot of men after us last night," Jeremy said. "There couldn't have been many left behind." "Wait a minute," Kitty said. She clasped Jeremy's elbow. "Look, coming around the corner of the house. He must have been out back guarding the rear." "That's Hal Jessup," Jeremy mused. Down below, Jessup strode up to Dewey. The two said something to each other, then Dewey handed Jessup the makings for a smoke. Jessup poured the tobacco in the papers, rolled it, and put it between his lips, letting it dangle. Dewey scratched a match, held it to the cigarette tip, his hand cupped around it to keep the slight morning breeze from blowing it out. Jessup exhaled a puff of smoke, raised a hand in a gesture of thanks, turned, and headed back around the corner of the house and disappeared. "Headed back to guard the back door," Kitty said to Jeremy. "Looks like there's just the two of them. I'll take care of Dewey. You take care of Jessup. Be careful, and keep an eye out in case there are any more of Price's men around." "Will do, sis, and you be careful too." He slid back below the ridgeline and started to circle wide around the hill and descend toward the rear of the ranch house. "Here goes," Kitty sighed to herself. "Might as well take it head on." "I'm sorry, Eunice, but sometimes you make me so mad." Simon Price was pacing back and forth in his parlor. Sweat was beading on his brow, and panic was all over his face. Eunice was sitting in a straight chair next to a lamp table. Her head was tilted back, and she was holding a cold compress to her left eye and cheek. She lowered the cloth, folded it over, and placed a cooler part of the compress against her blackened eye and swollen, bruised cheek. "That's what you always say, Simon. Then you do it all over again." "But I mean it this time, sweetie." His voice was coated with sugar, and he seemed to be pleading for forgiveness. "I promise, I'll never do it again." He still thought he could bring her around. It always worked before, even if it meant her sousing herself with alcohol until she could forget and not feel anything. "You always say that, Simon. You can't fool me anymore. Hell, you never did." "Have a drink and you'll feel better," he said, turning toward a coffee table and retrieving a bottle of wine and a glass. He poured it almost full and extended it to her. She glared at him with her one good eye. "You think that's going to fix everything? You're wrong." She shifted her sight to the glass. "But what the hell?" She dropped the compress and reached for the glass. Simon smiled broadly, pleased with himself. Now she'll drink herself into a stupor again and stay there until bedtime. "Just like always," Sarah Price said from where she was sitting on the couch at the far side of the room. "I don't need any sass from you, Sarah," Price growled. He was still watching Eunice downing the glass of wine in large gulps. "Then let me go to my room." Where I can be alone, Sarah pleaded. No, I want you right here where I can see you. I don't want that Carlin boy sneaking back here and getting into your room or you getting out to meet with him. I saw how you looked at him last night. And just how was that? He's an outlaw. You said so yourself. Hell, you even made him one. That will be just enough out of you, young lady. What are you going to do about it? Send me to my room, Daddy. Just sit there and be quiet, Price commanded. I don't want to hear. His words trailed off, and he twisted toward the front door as a loud pounding knock rattled the hinges. Mr. Price, it's Dewey. I've got to talk to you. Open up. The rapping continued with an urgency. Price hurried to the door, unlocked it, and turned the knob. He was just beginning to pull the door open when it suddenly burst inward, pushing him back and off balance. Gus Dewey plunged through the open doorway, stumbling forward and plowing into the squat banker. They both fell to the floor in a heap, and as the stunned Simon Price managed to untangle himself from his bodyguard, he rolled free and looked up toward the door that was now closing behind a small, slim figure. What is this? Price stammered, looking up and gazing into the gaping maw of a Colt pistol barrel. Then sudden realization swept over him as he saw Kitty Carlin standing there before him with the pistol held low and inches from the banker's face. Her own face was placid and void of expression. Her eyes were cold and hard. You'll never get away with this, Price stammered. Hal Jessup is out back. He'll never let you get out of here alive. Wrong! A male voice sounded behind him, and a staggering figure fell forward and landed with a thud on the floor next to Gus Dewey, who was just now starting to sit up. Hal Jessup had a gash above his left brow, and blood trickled from the broken skin. He rolled from side to side, clutching his wound and writhing in pain. He still seemed stunned. Jeremy Carlin stepped around the forms on the floor and pointed his weapon at Price. Still think you call the tune? He chided. With one hand, Jeremy grasped Price's collar and hauled him to his feet. Simon swallowed hard as he stumbled to his feet and tried to regain his balance. He looked from one Carlin to the other, then to his fallen men, and finally glanced toward the parlor where Sarah still sat on the couch, unmoving. Jeremy, she whispered to herself, and her eyes met his as he turned away from Simon Price and stared at her. There was a softness and a hint of regret in Jeremy's eyes. Then Sarah looked away and lowered her head. Jeremy, Kitty ordered, seeing her brother distracted. Keep your eye on those two on the floor. Don't let them move. The two men, already trying to regain their senses, froze in place, staring up at Jeremy as he swung the muzzle of his pistol toward them. Eunice lowered her wine glass and returned the cold compress to her face. What do you want of me? Simon croaked. The money, of course, you stupid ass. Kitty pulled back the hammer of her 6-gun and let it click into place. Price was trembling. But, no buts about it. Kitty's voice was harsh. I'm taking it whether I leave you here alive or dead. Makes no difference to me. It's your call. Now are we going out there and get it? She pointed the muzzle of her gun toward the office in the back. You've got me all confused, Price pleaded. I can't remember the combination to the safe. Even if I could, I wouldn't open it for the likes of you. Then I guess you're just going to have to die. Kitty pushed the barrel into Price's face. Her jaws clenched and the knuckle of her trigger finger whitened as she squeezed the trigger, taking up the slack. If you kill me, you'll never get the money. I'm the only one who knows the combination. I thought you said you forgot it. I lied. Without me, you'll never get the safe open. Then we'll just take it with us, Kitty said. She pushed the pistol forward, her fingers still tightening on the trigger. No need for that, Eunice said from the other room. I know the combination. She lowered her compress, and Kitty could see the bruises around her eye and left side of her face. You pig! Kitty oathed at the sight of Price's brutality toward his wife. She shifted her weight, releasing her finger from the trigger and swinging the weapon in a wide arc and slashing the barrel across Price's high forehead. His eyes crossed, and he crumpled to the floor next to his men. Blood trickled into his eye from the torn gash. He rolled to his side and looked up at Eunice. "No, don't open it for her, Eunice. It's your money too, remember? Don't let them get away with it." "Of course it's my money too. It's all mine. Remember, you've taken it all away from me." But sweetie," he pleaded, "if you let them take it, you won't have anything." "I don't have anything now." She stood up and headed toward Simon's office. "You do this, Eunice," Simon bellowed. "I swear you're going to pay for this." Eunice continued walking away. She didn't bother to answer or look back. "You hear me, Eunice. You'll pay for this." "Seems to me she's already paid enough," Kitty said, as she knelt down beside the banker. "Now you listen to me, and you listen good. If I hear you have hurt that woman again, I'll be back." She pushed the muzzle barrel against his forehead between the eyes. His head was already pounding in pain. "What you've done to that woman will be nothing compared to what I'll do to you before I kill you. You got that straight, mister?" Price's expression was blank, and he didn't respond. Kitty jammed the pistol barrel harder into his head. "Well, have you?" Her lips pulled together in a sneer. Yes, for God's sakes, yes." He started to cry. Chapter 23. The train whistle blew with the shrillness of a bellowing cow. Dark smoke plumed from the smokestack, billowing into a dark cloud in the pale blue sky, now beginning to gray with the waning late afternoon sun. The bell chimed its signaling call, indicating the train was about to depart. Kitty Carlin sat straight and tall in the saddle on her black and white horse next to the siding just to the left of the railroad depot. After leaving the Big Dollar Ranch and sending Jeremy back to the hideout to meet up with the others, it had taken her most of the day to catch up with her friends and turn over the money she had gotten from Simon Price. The take had amounted to just over $60,000. Enough to reimburse most of what the homesteaders had been swindled out of. Behind her, a quarter-mile away to the east, the buildings of the town of Apache Wells took shape, forming a jagged horizon above the otherwise flat plain. The Pinto stamped nervously, hooves churning the sand and kicking up dust, as the clamoring noise of the mighty engine frightened the horse. Kitty pulled a tight rein, bringing the animal up short, holding the head high and keeping as much control of the Pinto as possible. The wheels of the train began to turn slightly, and the engine began a slow chug. Sporadic bursts of smoke from the smokestack in gray-black puffs, and gradually turning to gray and white as the wheels rolled onward in a more smooth motion as the train began to pull away from the station. The Pinto shied even more and tugged harder against the reins as steam hissed from the brake lines. Kitty hauled the horse into a smaller circle of movement, holding the animal somewhat in place. The rail cars began to roll slowly by, and the wheels turned more smoothly and regularly. The chug-chug of the engine settled to a faster rhythmic beat and started to pick up speed. Freight cars rolled by one. The passenger car was up front and had already passed from Kitty's view. Her friends were on their way to somewhere. Most with different destinations, but hopefully all to better lives. Shards of the waning sunlight winked through the brakes between each car passing by, and the lashes came faster as the mighty engine pulled its load at an increasing speed. The Pinto began to settle as the clamor of the myriad of sounds settled to an even drone. Kitty held her mount steady, waiting for the train to pass by, for she would need to cross the tracks to head home. The parade of boxcars seemed endless as she waited for each to pass by in turn. She didn't begin to get impatient until she could see that there were only 3 cars remaining before the familiar trailing signature caboose was approaching. She clutched tight on the reins, ready to release the uneasy horse, and had her feet set to gig the Pinto into motion. One car passed by, then number 2, 3. The caboose rolled by, and just as Kitty was set to ride across the tracks, she saw a man sitting on a magnificent sorrel stallion directly across from her on the other side of the tracks. Streams of light from the upper half of the setting sun dipping low into the western horizon backlighted the man and hid his face in shadow, but she knew immediately that it was Matt Starr. With a quick yank on the reins, she neck-reined the Pinto, turning almost on a dime, churning the ground beneath the horse's hoofs, and kicking up a swirling cloud of dust that almost engulfed horse and rider. Whipping the black and white horse savagely across the neck with the reins, she jammed her heels into his sides, drumming her heels wildly. She sent the animal speeding away parallel to the track. Matt Starr wasted no time in guiding his sorrel across the tracks. He had to let the animal pick its way safely across the rails and between the ties before he could urge him into a gallop in pursuit. By the time the sorrel finally reached its stride, Kitty was already far off down the track and guiding her horse back across the rails. She had already gotten across and had spurred her horse back into a full gallop, spewing a cloud of dust behind her by the time Matt pulled rein on his own mount and slowed to a walk, as he once again let the sorrel pick his way back across the tracks. By the time he was crossed over and had once again urged the animal into a full gallop, Kitty was already just a small dark shadow in a plume of dust disappearing in the distance. Starr gave the sorrel his head and let him run full stride. The gallant horse responded eagerly to Matt's hand. It had been a long day for the sorrel, and Matt was not sure if he could now sustain a lengthy chase. Starr had pushed the sorrel hard and fast after he and Pizzo Martin, with the rest of the posse, had returned to Simon Price's Big Dollar Ranch near noon that day. It had taken all morning for them to gather up their scattered horses and determine that there was no trail left to follow the Wildcat gang. Once he learned that Kitty had returned and robbed Price, he set off immediately for Apache Wells, as he knew Kitty's plan was to meet her friends there. He refrained from telling Price, Martin, or anyone else what he was up to, and rode off, much to the complaints of Price and Martin. The sorrel was still displaying extraordinary stamina after a full day's work, but Starr knew that Kitty's black and white would have had time to recover its own strength after reaching Apache Wells. Matt figured that Kitty must have been there for at least 2 hours. It would have taken that long to meet with the homesteaders, distribute the money, dispose of horses and wagons left behind, and then see her friends off on their new ventures. Now, as he pushed the big stallion onward, he hoped his friend could keep up the pace. Even at a full gallop, his quarry was increasing her lead, heading across open plains into the rugged badlands beyond. But with every stride, and with each passing minute, Matt could tell that the sorrel was starting to falter. Lather was starting to fleck on the animal's neck and flanks, and if it hadn't been for the clatter of shod hooves against hard pack ground, he might have heard the horse starting to wheeze from his nostrils. Kitty's Pinto was blowing hard by the time they rode into the cover of rocks and trees at the beginning of the Badlands. Kitty pulled up on the reins and let the horse slow to a walk. She twisted in the saddle and glanced back. She could see the dust cloud far in the distance, but even for the moment she had stopped, she could see that cloud approaching fast, and now she could see the faint shadow of the rider and horse in its midst. Twisting back around, she gigged the Pinto forward and guided him gingerly between boulders that seemed to be strewn haphazardly across the countryside. It was going to be slow going from here on out, she knew. But she also knew that it would be slow going for her pursuer as well. Occasionally, Kitty would check her back trail as she threaded her way among the rocks and scrub brush. She could no longer see Matt Starr behind her, but she was certain he was still there. Only now she had no way of knowing how far behind or how close he may be. All she could do was keep moving forward. One consolation was that the slowness of her current pace had given her horse a chance to regain its strength somewhat. By the time the rock-covered terrain started to fall behind them, giving way to sparse grass cover and trees, she was able to spur her pony to a faster pace. But she still needed to keep aware of the need for preserving the Pinto's strength and stamina. A half hour later, dusk was settling in fast, and Kitty had put several miles behind her. The countryside had fanned out into a wide valley, spreading out between two mountain ranges that continued for miles on each side. The valley, though not lush with green grass, it did show a semblance of greenery and vegetation. Weeds grew aplenty. Trees and brush sporadically dotted the landscape. The Pinto had been faltering for the last mile, and Kitty brought him to a walk and soon to a complete halt. "Sorry, boy," she apologized to the horse, "but we've got to keep going." She nudged the horse gently with her heels and urged him forward. He shuffled hesitantly onward. "Oh, hell," Kitty oathed to herself. She jumped down from the saddle. "I'll walk a ways, give you a break." With reins in hand, she began to trudge on with the black and white following. 5 minutes passed by, and she worried that while she traveled on foot, Matt Starr would be catching up to her. Her only hope was that his horse was also being played out. Hopefully, he also had to resort to resting his mount or travel on foot. But another 5 minutes proved her wrong. In the gathering darkness and creeping shadows, she could faintly see movement along the trail behind her. It had to be Matt Starr. She had no doubt about it. He was still some distance away, but he was still mounted, and though not riding at a gallop, he was rapidly closing the distance between them. "Sorry, boy," Kitty said as she hurriedly climbed back aboard and sent the Pinto forward at a trot. She headed toward a clump of trees and surrounding brush. Perhaps if she could circle around them and find a hiding place while out of sight of her pursuer, she could wait out his advance until he passed her by. On the other side of the wooded area, she spied a cottonwood tree with low hanging branches. She suddenly had an idea. She rode toward the tree. At the same time, she loosened her lariat from her saddle and thrust her right arm through the center of the coil and shoved it to her shoulder. As she rode her Pinto under the low-hanging branches, she lifted herself from the saddle, grasped the lowest hanging branch, and pulled herself up. She gave the Pinto one last kick and shouted, "Hee-ya!" The Pinto ran out from under her and left her hanging for a moment before she pulled herself up, folded her body, and rolled over on top of the branch. She gained a good perch, then shook out the right-sized loop of the lariat for the purpose she had in mind. Only a minute or two had passed by when she knew she had made the right move at the right time. She could hear the pounding hoofbeats of Matt Starr's horse. And in the next minute, even in the ever-increasing encroachment of darkness, she could see him fast approaching the tree where she was hiding. She readied herself and made sure her rope was set. As Matt Starr rode under the tree, Kitty swiftly let the loop drop. It fell over his shoulders, and she tugged hard, pulling the loop tight around his arms and pinning them to his chest. It took Starr by surprise, and before he realized what was happening, the sorrel had run out from under him, and he found himself hanging in midair with his legs dangling. He tried to reach for his guns, but his arms were too tightly trapped against his body. As soon as she had tightened the rope on Matt Starr, Kitty quickly tied the end of it off on the portion of the tree trunk just above her. She swung down to the ground. Starr's body was still swinging to and fro, but the arcs were decreasing. Starr was looking down on her with chagrin. "Seems like every time we meet you got me dangling at the end of a rope. At least this time, I'm right side up." "I guess you should be careful about who you hang around with," Kitty chided. She turned and gave a shrill whistle. The black and white Pinto came trotting back. "Funny, ha-ha," Matt retorted as Kitty mounted up and rode away. Matt grinned to himself, then puckered up and gave his own shrill whistle. "I can do that too," he said, as if Kitty could hear him. The sorrel came ambling back toward his master. "Come close, fella," he urged the horse. The sorrel snorted and sidled up close. Matt's dangling legs bumped up against the saddle fenders. He swung back a little, bent his knees, and as he swung forward, he tried to get a perch on top of his saddle with his feet. He wobbled a bit, and the movement of the horse beneath him was just enough to allow him to stand. In a matter of seconds, he had raised himself high enough to loosen the lariat, toss it off, and away. He then dropped into the saddle and spurred the sorrel on in pursuit. Kitty could not believe her ears when she heard the pounding hooves behind her. He couldn't have gotten loose already. She cast a furtive look over her shoulder and saw him coming. She panicked, pulled her pistol, fired hurriedly, and without looking to see if she had a hit or a miss, she whipped her horse across the neck and kicked it in the ribs, sending it forward as fast as she could push him. She twisted in the saddle and looked back again. Star was still coming. She fired again, and he ducked his head low. Twice more she fired, but he kept coming. He was only a few feet behind her now, and he was swinging his own lariat in a wide loop above his head. Kitty felt the rope settle around her shoulders and pull tight. She dropped her pistol just as the pinto ran out from under her. She felt empty air beneath her, and then pain racking through her body as she fell with a thud to the hard ground below. The blow had knocked the wind from her lungs, and as she began to gather herself up and breathe again, she rolled over and tried to sit up. Above her, sitting astride his sorrel, Matt Starr gazed down at her with amusement as he coiled his lariat. "Anything you can do, I can do better," he said. "Yeah," Kitty growled as she pushed herself to her feet. "We'll see about that next time." "Well, I think your next times are over," Matt chided. Then said, "Are you all right?" "Yeah, just fine," Kitty answered, her tone thick with sarcasm. She was rubbing the right half of her buttocks with her hand. "Probably bruised my pride." "I know all about pride," Matt said, grinning as he stepped down from the saddle and came forward toward her, still coiling his lariat. "I'll just bet you do," Kitty said, quickly pulling her hand away from her rump, eyes flashing with anger. "Are you okay to ride?" Matt asked. Matt's congenial smile made her even madder. "Yes, I am," she said. "But just in case you haven't noticed, I don't have a horse. You let it get away. That didn't stop you before. All you have to do is whistle, and he'll come back. You do know how to whistle, don't you? Just put your lips together and blow." Chapter 24. "It's getting too dark to travel any farther tonight," Matt Starr said. "Besides, I don't know about you, but it's been a long day and I can't remember when I ate last. My belt buckle's flapping at my backbone and I'm hungry." Kitty had remained sullen, lounging sullenly in the saddle as she rode next to the young marshal. She made no comment, but Matt knew she had to be hungry too. They had ridden a few miles and had come across a small stream. It wasn't wide or deep, but it was enough to fill canteens, provide water for the animals, and enough for washing and cooking. "Here's as good a place as any to camp and spend the night," Matt said as he stepped down from the saddle. He stood there, reins in hand, and looked up at Kitty. Anger was still in her eyes, and her mouth was twisted in a pout. "Well," he said, "aren't you going to get down? You expect me to spend the night here? With you? Alone? I don't see anyone else here to spend it with." "It's not decent," Kitty sneered. "How do I know I can trust you?" "Seems to me it's the other way around. How do I know I can trust you? You're the outlaw. I hear tell you are mighty dangerous." "Yes, I am. You'd better believe it. If I get a chance, I'll eat you up and spit you out." "As appealing as that sounds, I don't think you're going to get that chance." "It'd probably make me sick anyways," Kitty growled. "Now, are you going to get off that horse, or do I have to drag you off?" Amused as he was, Matt was getting tired of this repartee. Kitty remained stolid in the saddle. "Okay, have it your way." Matt reached up and grasped her left arm and pulled her from the saddle. He let go and let her fall to the ground. The sorrel shied away as she fell next to his hooves. "Did I bruise your pride some more?" Matt said, grinning as Kitty rolled into a sitting position and started to get up. "No, you didn't," she blustered impudently as she stood up. Her hand automatically reached for her thigh, but she caught herself and pulled it away, refraining from rubbing it. "Then start gathering up some branches and wood so we can start a fire," Matt ordered. "Ooh, you." She scurried away and started to pick up any kind of debris that might burn. "Don't stray too far," Matt called to her. "I want you to stay in sight." "Ooh," Kitty groaned as she continued her chore. The night air was starting to chill by the time Matt got the campfire going, and it felt good to huddle close to it. Kitty had remained silent, and when instructed, she had reluctantly prepared the evening meal. Matt had taken a can of beans, some jerky, a can of peaches, and a small bag of ground coffee from his saddlebags, along with a small fry pan for the beans, a small pot to brew coffee, 2 metal plates, 2 cups, and 2 forks. "Why do I have to do the cooking?" Kitty had complained while holding the pan of beans over the campfire flame. The coffee pot sat on a row of stones placed around the fire. It was already boiling. "Because you're a woman, and it's a woman's job," Matt Starr quipped. "And what's a man supposed to do?" Kitty asked without looking at him. He was sitting close to fire next to her. "He's supposed to keep his woman in line." "Well, I'm not your woman." "Somebody should have been keeping you in line. It's no young lady's business to be traipsing around the countryside, creating havoc and mayhem, making an outlaw out of herself." "I'm not an outlaw," Kitty protested. "What do you call robbing and stealing, then?" "It's not robbing and stealing when you take back what's yours or what belongs to others and you give it back to them." "Like robbing Simon Price and giving it to the homesteaders?" "Yes, like that," Kitty snapped. "Now are you ready for your beans? If I hold them here any longer, they're going to burn." Conversation had ceased while they both ate eagerly at their meager meal. When they were finished, Kitty got up and carried the utensils to the stream and washed them out. Matt Starr watched her as she went about the chores. He couldn't help but feel that here was a girl completely out of her element. Though she had broken the law and deserved to be arrested, he knew she was right. She was not really an outlaw at heart. He wished he could help her, but that was not his job. His job was only to apprehend her and take her to jail. Kitty returned from the stream and stowed the washed articles in Matt Starr's saddlebags. "Do you always have to watch me so closely?" she said as she closed them. "My job," Matt said. "Can't let you get away." "Just where am I supposed to get away to?" Matt shrugged. "You know, there are times when a girl needs a little privacy, you know? You going to watch me?" "That does pose a bit of a problem," Matt said thoughtfully. "I've never had this situation before. All of my prisoners have been men. You're the first woman I've ever had to bring in." "Yeah, and I know you can't forget that I am a woman. Can you? And I can't forget you're a man, and I know men, believe me." "Oh, do you now?" Matt said with rising interest. "Yes, and you're all thinking the same thing. You may think you've got me out here at your mercy, but you better not try anything. You'll pay for it." "Somehow I didn't take you for a pro," Matt quipped. Of all the mean-spirited things to say to a girl, Kitty came back with indignation. He went to the sorrel and retrieved his lariat. What are you going to do with that?" Kitty stammered. Her eyes widened with fear. Starr shook out a loop and tossed it over Kitty's shoulder and pulled it enough to fit around her waist, but not tight. "A lady's privacy," he said with a wry smile. "There's some bushes right over there. I'll just hold this rope, just so you don't try to run away once you're out of my sight." "Ooh, you," Kitty sputtered and headed off toward the brush. Just as she started to enter the brush, she halted, turned around, and said meekly, "You won't peek now? Will you?" "Word of honor," Matt crossed his heart. She turned quickly and disappeared inside the bushes as the rope's slack played out. A few minutes later, Kitty emerged from the brush, but on the other side of the stand. She had removed the rope and secured it to a stump. "Trying to get away?" Matt Starr asked. He was sitting on a rock just outside the brush where Kitty emerged with excitement on her face. It quickly faded, replaced by chagrin when she saw Matt sitting there. "Oh, you peeked," she said coyly. "Didn't have to, lady. I can read you like a book." He stood up and took her arm. "Let's get back to the fire. It's getting cold out here, and it's time we got to bed." "Yeah," Kitty said softly. "That's what I was afraid of." Matt spread both saddles out side by side next to the fire. He had turned them over so the cushiony bottom sides could be used for pillows. In front of one of the saddles, he spread his blanket. "I've only got one blanket," he explained. "You can have it. I'll try to keep warm somehow." "Yeah, I'll bet you think you will, but it's not going to work with me. If you think I'm going to lie down on that blanket next to you, you've got another thing coming." "We can do this the easy way or the hard way," Matt said forcefully. "I'm not easy." Kitty gritted her teeth and held herself rigid. "That's for sure, lady," Matt said, and gave her a shove that sent her to the ground, landing half on and half off the blanket. "I knew I couldn't trust you," Kitty blurted. "You shot at me last night." "I missed, didn't I? Besides, you shot at me today." "Well, I missed, didn't I?" Without saying another word, Matt squatted beside her, took out handcuffs, and snapped them on her wrists. "I knew you were into that kinky stuff," Kitty said. Matt let out a deep sigh. "Just a little precaution to keep you from getting away. Now slide over onto blanket a little more so I can cover you up," he said. Kitty refused to budge. "Damn it, Kitty!" Matt raised his voice, and Kitty could see the anger in his face. "Just do what I tell you, and do it now." Like a child realizing that a parent meant business with discipline, Kitty instinctively scooched over, fully on the blanket. She stared up at him as he pulled the rest of the blanket over her to wrap her in. You're not going to touch me, are you?" she stammered fearfully. "Of course not," Matt said as he tucked the blanket under her chin. Kitty gazed up at him. Her expression changed from fear to bewilderment. "You're not." She bolted upright into a sitting position. "Why not? What's wrong with me?" "Not a thing, Kitty Carlin, not a thing." Matt laughed and pushed her back down. "Matt?" Kitty said after a while. They had been lying side by side quietly for several minutes. Lacking a blanket for himself, he had spread his slicker out over himself for some remnant of warmth. It had been large enough to spread over Kitty too, adding an extra layer of cover. Matt grunted, having almost drifted off to sleep after talking at great length about Simon Price, Peso Martin, Harvey Trask, and how they had forced Kitty to take up this vendetta against them. She had told him about how she sought out her grandfather and his friends to help her. "What is it now?" he groaned. "Do you really have to take me in?" Kitty was staring straight up into the velvety night sky. There was little moon left, but there were myriads of twinkling stars casting a purple glow on the rippling waters of the stream nearby. "I'm afraid I do, Kitty. It's my job." "Couldn't you just say I got away or that you couldn't find me?" "I wish I could, Kitty," Matt said. "I know you have your reasons for what you've been doing, and I know you believe you are right. Simon Price has wronged you, and I believe he really is an evil man. But you've gone against the law, and you have to answer for it." "The law?" Kitty sneered. "You mean Harvey Trask? He's just Simon Price's flunky." "No, I don't believe Trask is the law. Just the opposite, but he does hold a position that is deemed to be law. And putting Trask aside, you can't just create your own law. That's being a vigilante, and that's just as wrong. Law needs to be in legitimate hands, and you need to abide by it. Even if the law is wrong, I only want justice." Sometimes there's a difference between law and justice, and it becomes the job and responsibility of us all to try to get them in sync. But it needs to be done legally and orderly for it to happen. What's going to happen to me? Kitty said. I mean, when you take me in. I'm not sure yet, Matt answered, but I promise that I'll do my best to help you. I don't think your best is going to be good enough. Price will see to that. My grandpa knows that too, and when he finds out I'm in jail, he'll come for me and there will be hell to pay. I hope not, Kitty. He'd be making matters worse and I'd have to take him in too. No, you won't, Kitty said. He'll kill you too. I just might get him first. Kitty pushed herself up, leaning on her elbow, and stared Matt Starr directly in the face. You'd do that, knowing that it would break my heart? I'm afraid I wouldn't have any choice, but believe me, that is the last thing I would ever want to do. But you would? If I had to. Kitty rolled back and returned to a lying position. She said not a word, and neither did Matt. After several minutes, Kitty said, Matt? Yeah, he couldn't see her, but he could her voice tell him that there were probably tears in her eyes. If not, for sure they were in her heart. I'm sorry. For what? I don't know. That's okay. The coldest part of the night settled in about 3:30 in the morning, and the deepest cloak of darkness hid the camp save for a few dying embers of the campfire. Matt Starr stirred restlessly in his sleep, and the biting cold was starting to urge him awake. He absently tugged at the slicker and rolled slightly toward Kitty's side, looking for warmth. He reached for her, and his hand fell on an empty blanket lying open on the hard-packed ground. In his groggy state of half-awakeness, the realization failed to register at first. Then, like the shot out of a gun, his eyes flashed wide open. He was suddenly awake. He jumped to a sitting position, his hands feeling the ground and blanket cloth with dashing strokes. Gone. She was gone. His eyes roamed about the camp, unbelieving. She was nowhere about. The brush. He quickly told himself she was there, but he knew she wasn't. Her pinto was no longer tethered next to his sorrel. She was gone. She was really gone. While he slept peacefully, she had escaped and stole off into the night. But she had stolen something else that night. She had stolen Matt Starr's heart. Oh, Kitty, he lamented to himself as he stood up and looked out into the night. He cursed himself for having given in to Kitty and removing the handcuffs earlier. Why couldn't you have trusted me? He knew now that he had no choice but to track Kitty down before she got herself in deeper. He knew he had to be the one to do it, for if anyone else ever caught up to Kitty, there could be no turning back for her. Or for himself, for that matter. Like it or not, Matt Starr knew from this moment on that it was Kitty Carlin, not Wildcat Kitty, that was his destiny. Oh, Kitty, he muttered, you shouldn't be an outlaw. You should be mine. 1938. Oh, Grandpa, Kathy said, her big round blue eyes bugging out with excited wonder. Did he ever catch her? Did they ever get together? Whoa, slow down there, girl, her grandfather said. Let me get on with the story. That was not the end, only the beginning. But can't you tell me now? I'm just dying to know. Just hang on and I'll get to it. He gave Kathy a squeeze, and she settled back on his lap. Kitty and Matt Starr crossed paths many times after that night on the trail. Several times he came close to catching her, and several times he did. That is, he at least caught up with her, but wound up working with her against Price and his associates. Somehow, Kitty would always get away. Or just maybe, Matt let her get away. He would never admit that to himself, though. Their relationship did grow over time, though. Meanwhile, Simon Price was turning up the heat against the Wildcats. He became more brazen about committing actual crimes himself and blamed his own outlawry on Wildcat Kitty and her gang. His fortunes grew, and he came to wield increasing power throughout the Southwest. As Price's stature grew, so did the claims of outlawry against the Wildcats. Price had never been happy with Matt Starr's handling of the case and his failure to bring the outlaws to justice. There were even increasing rumors about the young marshal's relationship with the outlaw princess. Price even suspected that Matt Starr was even helping her in her vendetta against him. In many cases he was right, but couldn't prove it. Price used his position to bring in additional lawmen and bounty hunters. At the same time, using his influences, he saw to it that Matt Starr would be assigned to other tasks that would keep him away from the influence of Kitty Carlin. Things got very hot for the Wildcats, and from time to time they would lay low for a while at an outlaw stronghold in the Colorado mountains. An old-time outlaw named Bob Dawson had years ago put the outlaw trail behind him and built a secluded town where he could provide a sanctuary for those who had tired of the outlaw trail and wanted to settle down, raise families, and live quiet lives for the rest of their days. The sanctuary grew, and as time went on, the old outlaw had become known only as Pop Dawson to his growing community. He called the place Robin's Roost. Nobody ever knew why it was called that, but I suspect Pop saw himself as Robin Hood, for he was always contributing the money he received from his tenants to churches, charities, and people in need. The Cyclone Kid had been a long-time friend of Pop Dawson, and it's obvious that he and Kitty were of the same cut, as they were somewhat Robin Hoods themselves. But even when the Wildcats were hiding out, they were being blamed for more crimes than ever, for they were not around to be a thorn in Simon Price's side. It became clear that there could be no rest for the Wildcats. They would always have to return and continue the fight. Thimble Creek grew rapidly as Price put his increasing wealth to work, and finally the community's name was changed to Fortune City in his honor. But all of this power and wealth was never enough for Simon Price, and he desired the role of Arizona Territorial Governor. Hugh Stanton was the governor at the time, and Price was not willing to wait out his tenure. With his newfound wealth and power, he had lobbied Washington and developed the necessary contacts that could propel him to the governor's chair if Stanton was no longer there. He immediately set out to have the current governor assassinated and conspired with the best assassins in the business to liquidate him. But their initial attempts failed, for Matt Starr had been assigned to protect Hugh Stanton. It was during this assignment that Matt Starr met the governor's daughter, Barbara, who he fell in love with and became engaged to her. "Wait a minute. Wait!" Kathy cried in protest. "That can't be. What about Kitty?" "Well," Kathy's grandfather said, "about that time, Kitty also fell in love with another." But, Kathy stammered, "You mean that Kitty and Matt Starr never got together? They never got married?" "You have to remember, Kathy, Kitty was an outlaw and Matt was a lawman. That was a tremendously difficult situation for the both of them." "Oh," Kathy said dejectedly, "I just thought—" "I know, but you do understand, don't you?" "Yes," Kathy said sadly. Then she thought a moment and her eyes brightened. "Was that man that Kitty fell in love with Dandy Jim?" "Dandy Jim? What do you know about Dandy Jim?" "It was in one of the stories I read. He carried Kitty off to the mountains. He was a really nice man. And handsome, too," the story said. "He was called the Jack of Diamonds, and he used a playing card as his trademark. Tell me it was Dandy Jim, Grandpa. I liked him, too." Her grandfather grinned and gave Kathy another squeeze. "I wish I could, kitten, but I can't." Kathy frowned and her little lips puckered to a pout. "But he was Dandy Jim's cousin. His name was Kip Dalton." Kathy's eyes brightened once again. "Was he nice and handsome like Dandy Jim?" "Even more so," her grandfather said wistfully. "Oh, did Kitty marry him?" "I'm afraid not." "Why?" "He was killed." "How?" "In a gunfight, I'm afraid." "Who killed him?" Kathy asked. There was a slight hesitation, then the answer. "I'm afraid it was Matt Starr." But, I thought Matt Starr was a good guy. He was. Does that mean that Kip Dalton was a bad guy? Not really, but sometimes things aren't what they seem and are hard to understand. I don't understand, Kathy said. Well, why don't we just get on with the story? Her grandfather said. Okay, Kathy said demurely and snuggled closer. Well, as things turned out, Kitty saved the governor from assassination. The Wildcats were given amnesty and sworn in as Arizona Deputy Territorial Marshals. Matt Starr had been kidnapped and forced to ride with Mexican outlaws in raids along the border. Kitty, Cyclone, Arapaho, Chief, and Jeremy rode south, rescued him, and brought him back. You mean they weren't outlaws anymore? Kathy asked. What happened after they rescued Matt Starr? Just settle down, Kathy, her grandfather urged. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Just settle down and listen. Kathy smiled and snuggled up. Okay, Grandpa, she giggled. Well, her grandpa started. Obviously, this whole turn of events did not settle well with Simon Price. And with that, he began to continue with the story. Chapter 25. Damn, double damn. This can't be happening, Simon Price fumed. He was pacing back and forth in his office off the parlor at his big dollar ranch. A puff of smoke rolled out of the end of his expensive cigar with each step he took. Peso Martin leaned against the far wall, and Harvey Trask sat in a wooden straight chair in the corner. How in hell can the Wildcat gang be law? After all they've done to me? He rubbed his hand over the bald spot on the back of his head. He was sweating from his anger and futile exertion, but mostly from sheer fear. They're in my office right now, Trask expounded. Practically threw me out, as much as accused me of being in on the outlawry around here that's been blamed on them. I wish I had known what Hugh Stanton had been up to, Price fumed. He led me to believe the Wildcats had escaped prison. How was I to know he had turned them loose and made deputy marshals out of them? I wouldn't have continued the robberies. Now it's obvious that it wasn't them behind it. They said it would be only a matter of time before they proved that you and I were the real outlaws, Trask said. Price stopped his pacing. That's just talk, Harvey. They got nothing on us. To himself, he wished that he believed that. But now, Price said with a slight smirk beginning to form, I think now is the time that we got ourselves rid of the Carlins and friends for good. Just what are you saying, Simon? The old lawman queried, fully understanding the implication. You know what I mean. We kill them. His eyes drifted to Peso. Peso pushed himself away from the wall and straightened. His thumbs were hooked into his gun belt. He sneered. What? I'm supposed to ride into town and just gun them down? How's that gonna look? Besides, you think they're all gonna stand by and let me shoot 'em? No, of course not, dummy. Peso stiffened a little. He didn't like that, but he refrained from a retort. They're out to catch the bandits that's been impersonating them. We're going to give them the opportunity. You're forgetting, my men and I are those bandits. I'm forgetting nothing. I'm saying that we stage one big robbery. One that will get the Wildcats to come after you. You lead them into a trap and dispose of them all. Sounds good, Peso said dryly. But what if they get us first? They won't. I wish I could be sure of that, Peso said with skepticism. You can, Price said confidently. I've got a plan. He glanced at his office door that was closed to the parlor. Just a moment, he said, going to the door, opening it and looking out. Eunice was at her usual place in a chair next to the coffee table. She was slumped over and in her usual alcoholic stupor. Sarah was sitting across the room on the sofa reading a magazine. Sarah, Price called, go to your room. I've got business to conduct down here. Sarah looked up, annoyed. She grimaced and showed her disdain, but she did his bidding. She took her magazine with her and reluctantly went quietly upstairs. Price closed the door behind him. "Now, gentlemen," he said, beginning to gloat, "this is how we're going to do this." He explained that the Wildcats would need a good reason to go after outlaws. If they were to pull off a job that was heinous enough, the Carlins would seek retribution with a vengeance that could blind them enough to be careless. The plan was to rob the next morning's train into Fortune City when it passed through Rocky Gorge. They would derail the train, and there should be enough casualties among passengers and trainmen to ensure the Wildcats' interest in catching the perpetrators. A clear trail would be left leading to Granite Pass. Peso and his men would be waiting and hiding. Once the Wildcats were inside the confines of the canyon, they would all be shot down. That would be the end of Wildcat Kitty and the Cyclone Kid for good. It was late morning the next day when Matt Starr rode into Fortune City. He was returning from his meeting with Governor Hugh Stanton and his reunion with Barbara. It had been a hard ride to the capital, and Matt's heart had weighed heavy on him, for he knew not how his return would be accepted. And even more importantly, he did not know how he, himself, was going to feel or react. The memory of the last night on the trail with Kitty, after his rescue from the border outlaws, haunted him all the way to Phoenix. "You're going back to her, aren't you?" Kitty said with resolution in her voice as they sat far off from the campfire in the shadows. Cyclone, close to the fire, tried not to be obvious that he was concerned about the conversation going on between the two young people. Occasionally, he would quickly glance their way and then back to the fire once he had caught a glimpse of them. There was a full moon out that night, and Matt could see the tears glistening on Kitty's cheek. "It's something I have to do," Matt had said. "I have to set everything right." I understand." Kitty choked back a sob. "I wish to hell I did, Kitty," Matt had said. With great sorrow, Kitty had watched Matt Starr ride off down the trail, early the next morning. The sun was just coming up, and as she watched the shadowed outline of Matt Starr disappear into the shimmering light above the horizon, no longer were there tears in her eyes or on her face. The time for tears was over, and in her heart she knew it was near time for everything to be over. Her quest for vengeance against Simon Price had cost her everything. Turning her eyes away from the trail and letting Matt Starr go forever, she gazed at her companions, now breaking camp and getting ready to saddle up for another day on the trail. They had been so loyal to her. But what had she done for them? Her grandfather, whom she had never known for the most part of her life, put his own life, what little he had left, on the line for her every day. He still slept on cold, hard ground every night, aggravating his rheumatism. And Chief Henry. He was there because he was the Cyclone's kid's friend. Arapahoe Brown, poor, sad, lonely Arapahoe Brown, had joined just to belong somewhere. And what of Jeremy? He deserved more than this. She had not given him the chance to be his own person, grow up and have a life of his own. By now he should have been settled down with the girl he wanted, but because of their vengeance, Trail Sarah Price was just as far out of reach for him as Matt Starr was for Kitty. Now, as Matt Starr guided his sorrel down the main street of Fortune City, he wondered if he had done the right thing. Matt had never wanted to hurt Barbara Stanton, and he had always been a man of his word. He had always kept his promises. But, when he had confronted Barbara Stanton, he knew it was time for him to be honest with everyone. Barbara, her father, and most importantly, himself. And, hopefully, to Kitty, knowing that this decision was going to cost her dearly. There had been no way he could keep his promise to Barbara. It was Kitty he wanted. It had always been Kitty, even with the impossibility of it all, with them being on opposite sides of the law. Amnesty had solved that problem, removed the barrier. But, as he feared when he made this final decision, the barrier was now up again. Because of him, the Wildcat's amnesty had been revoked. The governor was not pleased with Matt's decision to call off the wedding. In his anger, he also rescinded the Wildcat's commissions as Arizona Territorial Deputy Marshals, and once again, they would be sought after as outlaws. There was only one way Matt could tear that barrier down again. As he rode away from the governor's mansion, he unpinned his marshal's badge and let it drop into the dust beneath the sorrel's hooves. The morning stage had just rolled into Fortune City only moments before Matt Starr appeared on the street. The passengers had been unloading and receiving their baggage as Matt Starr approached. He had been deep in thought and paid little attention until he saw the last passenger disembark. A tall, good-looking man, wearing a black broadcloth suit and derby hat, stepped down from the coach and was brushing dust off his trouser legs. Matt Starr bolted upright in his saddle. It couldn't be, he told himself. But yes, it was him. He was still lean and in good shape, and he was still well-dressed, but not like he had been the last time Matt Starr had seen him. He looked much like any other Eastern dude, but this man was no dude. Gone was the snappy, Western-cut black suit, brocade white shirt, and fancy vest of a gambling man that once had been the man's trademark. Matt Starr drew rein in front of the man. "Dandy Jim Butler," he exclaimed, quickly stepping down out of the saddle and extending his hand in friendship. "I couldn't believe my eyes when I first saw you. And look at you. How you're dressed. What's happened? You haven't fallen on hard times, have you?" "No, but there's certainly been some changes in my life. But we can talk about that later. I'm here to find Kitty." "Kitty?" Matt Starr's friendly smile disappeared, replaced now by suspicion. Kitty had always been fond of Dandy Jim. Maybe more than that, Matt thought to himself. A hint of jealousy was creeping into his brain. After all this time, Matt had finally made a decision about Kitty, and now Dandy Jim had to show up. "Yes," Dandy Jim said. "I've been in Chicago for quite a while, taking care of Kitty's mother." "Taking care of her mother? What's that all about? And why you?" Maybe Kitty and Jim had gotten even closer than he thought. "I've come to tell Kitty that her mother passed away." "Oh, I'm sorry. More bad news for the girl. I didn't know you were involved." "We've been taking care of Kitty's mother for almost a year now." "We?" "Yes, my wife and I." "Your wife?" Matt said, surprised. He tried to hide the relief in his voice. "Yes, you wouldn't have known. Kitty doesn't even know." "Seems to me Kitty was quite taken with you," Matt said. "How do you think she's going to take that news?" Hoping to erase his skepticism. "She'll be happy for us, I'm sure." "I hope so," Matt thought to himself, and looked away as he became aware of a horse and buggy passing by. Simon Price nodded as he rode past. He had a satisfied smirk on his face. "I see the old curmudgeon still with you," Jim said, watching the banker drive on toward the livery. "Someday, he's going to get his due," Matt answered. "I just hope Kitty never has to pay for it." "Well, Cyclone always said that he and Rap should just ride in and shoot him. That would end it all." "Yes, but would that be the end of Kitty and the others too?" Matt said, not expecting an answer. Then he said, "Standing here in the street is no place to talk, Jim. Let's go over to the sheriff's office and talk." "Trask's still the sheriff?" "Yes, but his teeth have been pulled. I'll tell you all about it." They turned and strode up the street. Just as they started to cross over to the jail on the other side of the street, they saw Sarah Price ride up in front of the office. She hurriedly dismounted, didn't take time to spin the reins at the hitch rail. She bounded up onto the board sidewalk, grasped the doorknob and pushed forward. Locked. The damn door was locked. She was too late. They had already gone. She was just twisting around to head back to her horse when Matt Starr called to her. "Can I help?" He and Jim had quickened their steps and were almost there. Jim grasped Sarah's horse's trailing reins, making sure the girl would not leave before they found out the problem. "Oh, Marshal," Sarah gasped. She didn't notice he wasn't wearing a badge. "I'm too late. They've already gone. They'll be killed. I came to warn Jeremy." Gone? Killed? Jeremy? Sarah, what are you talking about? I couldn't leave the ranch while my father was still there. He wouldn't let me. Now it's too late. Too late for what? Matt demanded. To stop them from going after the train robbers. Train robbers? What are you talking about? Sarah quickly told how she had heard her father making plans to lead the Wildcats into an ambush at Granite Pass. Chapter 26. Here they come now, Peso Martin said as he watched the 5 riders ride into the canyon. He levered around into the chamber of his Winchester and braced the barrel against the side of a large boulder high up on the canyon rim. His sights were set on the center rider. Probably the Cyclone kid. He couldn't be sure at that range, but no matter. All of the Wildcats would be dead soon anyways. Still, he would hope that it was his pleasure to bring down the leaders. Tell the others to get ready, he said to Harvey Trask without looking at him. Everyone opens up with all they've got once I start the ball rolling. Trask hurried away to each of the men where they had taken up their positions. When he returned to Peso's side, he was sweating, and Peso could see the old man's hands trembling. Settle down, Harvey, Peso said. There's nothing to worry about. It'll be like shooting ducks in a pond. They won't know what hit them, and we'll be rid of them for good. But, this is out-and-out murder, Trask stammered. I've never been a party to anything like this before. I don't know why I had to come along. Simon thought you'd enjoy it, Peso chuckled. Besides, this way you can't ever tell what really happened without implicating yourself. You know I'd never do a thing like that. Sure, Harvey, Peso chided. He didn't believe that for a minute. Trask would give them away in a heartbeat if he thought it would save his own miserable hide. All right, Peso said, quickly changing the conversation. They're just about in the right spot. He steadied his aim and gripped the rifle stock tighter. His finger squeezed on the trigger and took up the slack. Another ounce of pressure. Harvey Trask shrank back against the rear of the boulder and steadied himself. His eyes lifted skyward, almost as if seeking to prey. A hawk glided through the sky above him, appearing from behind one bank of the canyon and disappearing over the rim of the opposite side. Its shrill shriek broke the silence, and Trask clenched his eyes tightly closed. Almost as if the hawk had signaled the start, it happened suddenly and fast. Down below, Cyclone spotted the immediate flash of sunlight on metal, just an instant before the gunfire erupted, spewing hot lead into the canyon floor. He was already shouting, "Let's get the hell out of here," as he spun his horse around almost in place. The others were reacting in unison, and they were bumping into each other as they tried to turn their mounts in retreat. Dark shapes of men popped up over the tops of the rock cover on each side of the canyon, rifles to their shoulders and firing rapidly into the small group of riders below. Flame and thunder, followed by searing hot projectiles of lead, poured into the canyon. The Wildcats had no sooner turned their mounts and started to retreat, spreading out away from each other, when more men with rifles appeared on the canyon sides from the direction they had come from. They were now trapped between the opposing forces. The Wildcats had automatically pulled pistols from their holsters as they maneuvered their horses into retreat and fired blindly and hastily at the men on the canyon walls. The attackers were out of handgun range, and the Wildcats were caught well within rifle range of the ambushers behind and in front of them. Bullets were whizzing past them and around their horses' hooves like pelting rain. Side by side, the Wildcats charged forward, riding side by side in an outstretched line, into the gauntlet ahead of them. Jeremy had sidled his mount to the far outside of the group when he became the first casualty. As if singled out from all the gunfire, the rifle that took him seemed louder than all the others. A red splotch spread across the front of his shirt. The impact of the bullet pushed him back in the saddle, his arms outstretched like the wings of a hawk. His horse seemed to run out from under him as his body spilled backward, out of the saddle to land lifelessly in the sand. "Jeremy!" Kitty shouted with terror-filled eyes. She pulled up on the reins and was turning her mount back. She felt the sting of hot lead. She dropped her six-shooter and fell from the saddle. Beside her, Chief Henry's mount went down and his body pitched forward over the horse's neck. By now, the firing from above, behind, and up ahead was a continual roar of thunder. Arapaho Brown's gray stallion was the next to go down, falling onto his side with Rap beneath the animal's weight. Cyclone's big chestnut mare reared on her hind legs, and Cyclone fell backwards, out of the saddle, and sprawled into the sand. The mare ran off. From a half-mile away, Matt Starr and Dandy Jim could hear the barrage of gunfire in the canyon ahead as they raced their horses onward, knowing that they were arriving just too late. As quickly as it started, it ended. Gunfire ceased, and the desert air returned to calm. Silence once again settled into the canyon. The Wildcat gang lay scattered about the canyon floor, and in the stillness, the screech of a solitary hawk echoed above as he soared across the burning sky. Peso Martin smiled with self-satisfaction as he lowered his rifle and surveyed the scene below on the canyon floor. The only movement was the milling about of horses without riders. 5 motionless shapes lie on the ground. "We won't have to worry about them anymore," he gloated. Then, realizing that Trask was no longer next to him, he turned and saw the old man almost sitting on the ground, half slid down the side of the boulder. His entire body was shaking. His eyes were still closed. "Harvey! Harvey!" Peso shouted, grasping Trask's arm, pulling him to his feet and dragging him around the boulder. "It's all over. Just take a look." No, Harvey pleaded. "I don't want to look." His shoulders slumped, and he kept his head down. "Pull yourself together, man," Peso ordered, shaking the old man. Look at me." He held Trask in front of him, their faces nose to nose. Trask seemed disoriented, and Martin held him up straight and slapped him across the face. Trask blinked, and the glaze left his eyes. "That's better," Peso said, letting the man down to stand on his own 2 feet. "You got a hold of yourself now?" Why, yeah, I think so." His legs still felt rubbery beneath him, but he held his stance. "Good. Now listen closely," Peso said. "I want you to go down there and make sure they're dead." Me? Why me?" "Because I said so. And because you're the sheriff and you were with them." No, I wasn't. You know that. I was right here with you." "No, you weren't. You were down there with them." He drew his pistol with his right hand while he grasped Trask's left arm and held it high. Pinching the fleshy part of his arm, he placed the pistol muzzle against the fold of flesh and squeezed off a round, ripping an open gash. Bright red blood sprayed against the boulder beside him. Trask staggered back a step, grasping his hurt arm. Pain racked through him, and he felt sick to his stomach. It wouldn't look good if the only survivor didn't get out without a scratch. Now get down there. As Matt Starr and Dandy Jim rode into the mouth of the canyon, they could see riders on both sides of the canyon wheeling their mounts away from the rims and disappearing from sight. Harvey Trask had just climbed down from the canyon rim and was making his way toward the fallen shapes on the canyon floor. He was closing in on where the Cyclone kid lay when Cy Carlin's shoulders moved and he pushed his chest up out of the dirt with his pistol aimed at Trask. Cyclone held the weapon with both hands and eared the hammer back. Trask staggered back in shock. He couldn't believe his eyes. The Cyclone kid was supposed to be dead. Why wasn't he? Harvey wanted to run, but he couldn't. He tried to raise his pistol that was already in hand, but it felt so heavy he couldn't raise it. Cyclone's pistol cracked, and the bullet drove into the ground at Trask's feet, spewing up sod and dirt over the toes of Trask's boots. Cyclone tried to ear the hammer of his weapon back again, but he dropped it and fell face forward back to the ground. Trask was still frozen in place as Matt Starr rode up in front of him, six-gun in hand and barring him from any possible flight. Jim had veered his pony away toward Cyclone, leaped out of the saddle, and ran to his side. "I'm okay," Cyclone said, as Jim stooped and turned him over. "See to Jeremy and Kitty, they're hurt." He didn't even question Jim's sudden appearance. "I'm just a bit stove in. I'll be all right." Jim nodded and let the old man lie back in the dirt. He turned and raced to where Jeremy Carlin lay flat on his back, arms outstretched on each side. Kitty was lying prone across her brother's body, hugging him tightly. Her shirt was ripped across the top of her left shoulder, and blood was oozing down her arm. Jim reached out and pulled Kitty away, rolling her to the side. He could see she wasn't wounded anyplace else. Huge tears were streaming down Kitty's face, and she too did not seem to be surprised at Jim's presence. He examined Jeremy's chest wound. It was bad. Bright red blood bubbled around his lips with every feeble gasp of breath. His shirt front was covered completely with blood. Jim turned to Kitty. She was staring pleadingly into his face. The question didn't have to be uttered. Jim shook his head in sadness and despair. Kitty threw herself forward back toward her brother's body, but Jim caught her first and held her tight to his chest. He could feel the moistness of her tears through his shirt as she sobbed. Meanwhile, Matt Starr had dismounted, and keeping his pistol trained on Trask, he went to help Cyclone, who was already trying to stand up under his own steam. "Don't worry about me, son," Cyclone said, getting to his feet. His legs felt a little wobbly at first, but he gained a firm foothold. "I'm all right. See to the others." He shuffled off toward his grandchildren. Rapp was just now struggling to slide himself out from under his dead gray. When he finally crawled out and stood, he gazed down sadly at his old friend. "You may have been an ornery old devil, son, but you was mine. All I ever had that was worth a hoot. I'm sure gonna miss ya." He looked around and saw the huddle near Jeremy's body. Cyclone was just now kneeling down. His massive old hand was patting Kitty's back softly, while Jim continued to hold her. Off to his right, he could see Chief Henry lying motionless on the ground. He strode over to him and squatted. He reached out and touched his friend. There didn't seem to be any blood, and Henry was still breathing. "Come on, you old faker," Rapp urged. "Wake up." He shook him hard. He didn't move. Rapp kept shaking him, each tug with greater force. "Come on, you old fake engine. If you don't wake up, I'm gonna scalp you myself. Now wake up." Rapp was beginning to panic when Henry finally stirred and groaned. Rapp grinned. "Scared me half out of my wits," he said with a lump in his throat. "I ought to scalp you anyways, just for the fun of it." As Kitty felt the nearness of her grandfather, she pulled away from Jim and buried her face in Cyclone's broad chest. He held her tight, comforting her as he looked over his shoulder at Jeremy. He knew it was bad, and glanced toward Jim for confirmation. Jim only nodded. Cyclone felt a lump in his throat and hugged Kitty tighter. Matt Starr, with his prisoner in tow and with Rapp and Henry, stepped up behind Cyclone. The gravity of the situation was obvious. "It's all my fault, Grandpa," Kitty was sobbing. "If I hadn't taken up this vendetta against Simon Price, none of this would have happened. Now just look what's happened to Jeremy. None of it was his fault. He shouldn't be lying there dying like he is. It's all my fault," she said again. No, kitten," Cyclone said, stroking her hair. "It's not your fault. It's Simon Price's fault and nobody else's. It was his men who did this. Not you." Kitty pulled away and looked up into his sad old face. "If I could have just let it alone, Grandpa." "You're not to blame for anything, Kitty," Cyclone said. "If there's any other blame besides Price's, it's mine. I've always said that Rapp and I should just ride in and shoot the bastard. I should have done that, instead of letting you waste your life living like an outlaw. No, Grandpa, I could never let you do that. Be that as it may, that's what I should have done, and that's what I'm going to do now. It's time Simon Price paid his bill. Cyclone stood up. Hello, Jim, he said, as if addressing him for time. I reckon I know why you're here. He glanced toward Kitty. I reckon she does too. Then he turned toward Trask and slapped him across his face. Trask cringed and shrank down on bended knee. You're as much to blame for this as Simon Price and Paiso Martin. I ought to kill you right now, but I'm not gonna. You know why? Because you're going to ride into town and tell Price and Paiso that I'm coming for 'em, and I'm gonna shoot them so dead the wind will be whistling through the bullet holes till doomsday. Rap, Cyclone called without taking his eyes off Harvey Trask. Catch up Jeremy's horse for our dear sheriff. Now, Cyclone said to Trask, don't get any notions about riding off anywheres but to town. You do, and I'll track you down and skin you alive piece by gold dern piece. You got that? Go back and tell Price I'm coming for him. Do as you're told, and just maybe I might think about letting you live a while longer. Now get on that horse and get to gettin', Cyclone ordered, as Rap led Jeremy's horse up close. But I'm hurt, Trask begged. Can't you see my arms bleedin'? Want me to take a look at it, Cy? Jim offered. Nah, Cyclone scoffed. I reckon he's got enough blood in him to last him to town. After that, I don't much care. Now, Trask, get on that horse and get. I'm giving you a head start. Then, I'll be along directly. Oh, Grandpa, don't go, Kitty pleaded, as Cyclone gathered up the reins and was just about to climb into the chestnut mare's saddle. Trask had been gone a few minutes. Cyclone figured he had given the old lawman enough of a head start. I have to, girl. I want this thing settled for good. It's time you got on with your life. But there's nothing left. I've lost everything. Mom's gone and Jeremy's is slipping away. I can't lose you too. You're not going to lose me, kitten. Cyclone wrapped his huge arms around her and held her tight. We'll always ride together, no matter what. Just remember, you're Grandpa's girl, always. He let her loose, turned, and grasped the pommel of his saddle. He felt a little weak, and he tried to hide the unsteadiness on his feet. A trickle of blood leaked out of the sleeve of his duster and smeared the saddle leather. Mustering his waning strength, he heaved himself upward and lifted his bulk into the saddle. He settled himself, though a bit dizzy. Rap was already mounted on the rental horse that Jim had ridden out on. Chief Henry rode up beside him. Where do you think you're going, Henry? Cyclone groaned. How would it look, the Cyclone kid riding out for justice without his faithful Indian companion? He grinned. His thick glasses were gone. They had been broken and lost in the dirt where he had fallen from his horse. Where the hell's your glasses? Cyclone bellowed. Don't need them. I can see clearly now. The three old men grinned at each other and then spurred their horses off at a gallop without looking back. Matt Starr stepped up beside Kitty, wrapped his arms around her and held her. They watched until Cyclone, Rap, and Henry disappeared in the distance. Chapter 27. Harvey Trask raced Jeremy Carlin's horse hell-bent for leather into the main street of Fortune City, sending citizens scurrying out of his way and dashing for sanctuary on the board sidewalks. All eyes were on the lawman as he raced past the saloon where a bevy of horses stood tied to several hitch rails. Paiso Martin and his men were inside the saloon, whooping it up and hollering at the top of their lungs, celebrating their victory of earlier in the day. Trask brought the horse to a sliding halt in front of the bank and practically fell out of the saddle in his haste. He left the reins trailing and the horse drifted off. There were 4 or 5 customers in the bank when Trask burst through the door. All eyes turned toward him as he raced behind the teller cages toward the door to Simon Price's office. Everyone out of the bank, he shouted. Banks closed until further notice. The tellers just looked at each other blankly, then shrugged to the customers. He's coming to kill you, Trask shouted as he burst through the door, shoving it closed behind him and leaning his back against it for support. Blood from his wound dripped onto the floor. You've got to get out. What the hell are you talking about? Price said with annoyance. He was sitting in the plush leather chair in the corner. Flo Baxter was sitting on his lap with her arms curled around the banker's flabby neck. Flo pulled back, sitting upright at the sudden intrusion, her face twisted in consternation. There's no time, Simon. You've got to get out now. I tell you, he's coming. He's really mad this time, and he won't stop until he kills you. He sent me to tell you. Just slow down there, Harvey. Who's coming? Who's going to kill me? The Cyclone Kid. That's who? Harvey's legs were shaking. Simon Price smiled slyly. Harvey, he said. Nothing to worry about. The Cyclone Kid is dead. Peso just told me so. Peso's a fool, Trask blurted. And a damn liar? You don't just kill the Cyclone Kid. I tell you, he's still alive and he's coming for you. And his friends are coming with him. You mean Peso bungled the job? Price's face flushed with anger as realization set in. He jumped to his feet, dumping Flo to the floor. She fell clumsily, her skirt hiked up above her knees. A lock of blonde hair fell over her left brow and into her eye. She blew it aside and glared at Price angrily. Price sprang forward, grasping Trask by the collar with both hands and lifting him off the floor and banging him against the closed door. You fools, he bellowed. Can't you ever do anything right? Not my fault, Simon. It was Peso. You were supposed to make sure? Simon growled, his face twisted in a savage snarl. But, they caught me. How come you're still alive? They sent me to tell you they were coming for you. That they're going to kill you. The boy was shot up bad and they're mad. Simon held the man there for a while as his anger finally subsided. He had come to a decision of what he must do. He loosened his grip on Harvey's shirt collar and let him down. He took a step back away from the cringing man and ordered, Get over to the saloon and tell Peso what has happened. Tell him to get his men ready to stand the Wildcats off. Flo had picked herself up off the floor and moved to the opposite corner of the room. No, Simon, no, Trask whined. I've done what I was told. Now I want to just get away before they get here. You're in this just as deep as the rest of us, Harvey. But they said they'd let me live if I came here to warn you. And you believed them? And why would they want me warned? He no sooner asked the question when he realized the stark truth of the threat. The only way you're going to live is when we finish the Cyclone Kid off for good. Now go get Peso. Please, Simon, don't make me, Trask begged. I don't want to die. You pathetic coward, Price growled. He turned, went to his desk, opened the top drawer, reached in and pulled out a pistol. All right, Price said, extending his arm and pushing the weapon straight out in front of him at eye level, aimed at Harvey Trask's panic-stricken face. I'll go get Peso myself. He squeezed the trigger. Looks like they're waiting for us, the Cyclone Kid said, as he reined his big chestnut mare to a halt in the middle of the street at the edge of town. Arapaho Brown pulled his horse up on Cyclone's right. Chief Henry Two Owls sat his horse to the left. They all had rifles out. The base of the rifle stocks rested on a hip with barrel muzzles pointed skyward. Everyone seems to be off the street that should be. Looks like they got the street barricaded off down at the other end of town, Rapp mused. There's overturned wagons lined up clear across the street. And there's a bunch of men behind them with rifles pointed this way, Cyclone said. He looked to the right and left, his gaze drifting upward. There's men with rifles on the rooftops, spread out along the street on both sides. Watch out for them. A rifle barrel flashed a glint of sunlight from the top of the mercantile just behind the false front. "All right, fellas," Cyclone said, taking a deep breath and letting out a sigh. They all grinned at each other. "Let's do this." He stuffed his reins into his mouth, pulled his pistol with his Winchester still in his other hand, and spurred his horse forward. Dusters flapped in the breeze as the trio galloped forward, guns blazing and thundering. A barrage of fire came from behind the wagon barricade, and men stepped out into the open on the rooftops, with rifles barking. 1, 2, 3 men folded and fell to the ground as Wildcat bullets took them down. Others darted back out of sight, taking cover. Flame continued to spit from the rifles behind the barricade as the Wildcats rode onward, Cyclone firing his pistol in one hand while he fired his rifle with the other and recocking one-handed with a snap of the wrist and firing again. The blaring of 6 guns and rifles in the late afternoon merged into a continual roar of thunder beneath the empty blue sky above. It was over almost as soon as it began. The firing ceased, and only silence prevailed with a cloud of gun smoke enshrouding the street like a dense, heavy fog. 1938. Did they die? Kathy asked. Her eyes were bugging out and she was obviously very disturbed. Yes, her grandpa said. That was the end of Simon Price and Peso Martin. No, I mean Cyclone, Rap, and Chief. Did they survive? Did they die? Is it really that important to you, kitten? Well, yes. I wouldn't want them to die. There was a pout on her lips. Well, you know, Kathy, her grandpa said. That was 40 years ago. They were old men then. If they had survived, they certainly would have passed away since, by now. So does it really make a difference? Kathy thought about it for a moment, screwed up her in wonder. I don't know. I guess not. But I don't want the story to end like that. But it's not the way it ends. Kathy's eyes brightened. It's not? Oh, I just knew it couldn't end that way. She smiled, then thinking about it, she said, So how does the story end? Her grandfather smiled and hugged her closer. Well, it's like this. As unbelievable as it might seem, Jeremy Carlin survived after all. Oh, he did? Kathy sat straight up in his lap and wrapped her arms around his neck and hugged him. I'm so glad, she said, gazing into his face. Me too, her grandpa said. When he got well again, he married Sarah Price, and when Sarah's mother, Eunice, died, they inherited the ranch, including the land that had originally belonged to the Carlins. Jeremy renamed the whole ranch back to the Circle C. And what about Kitty? What happened to her? Well, she married Matt Starr after all. They rode away together and were never heard of since. Oh, I'm so glad, Kathy beamed. Then said, And what about Dandy Jim? Whatever happened to him? Her grandfather chuckled. He was best man at their wedding and then went on to live a wonderful life with a wonderful wife. You still haven't told me about the others. Well, let's look at this. With one hand, he reached to the floor and fingered through the pile of dime novels lying there. He found the one he wanted. I think this is the last story written about them, he said. He shifted Kathy around on his lap so they could both look at it. It was titled The Last Ride of Wildcat Kitty and the Cyclone Kid. It was written by Chris Coulter. He turned to the last page of the book. What's this doing in here? There was a playing card tucked inside, maybe as a bookmark. It was the Jack of Diamonds. Ooh, Kathy said. That's just like Dandy Jim's calling card. So it is, kitten. So it is. He tossed the card away. It floated through the air and landed on the floor next to the old trunk in the corner and fell face down. The gold lettering on the side of the trunk read, James Butler, M.D. He began to read. Dot, looks like they're waiting for us, the Cyclone Kid said, as he reined his big chestnut mare to a halt in the middle of the street at the edge of town. Wildcat Kitty sat on her black and white pinto to his right, and Jeremy Carlin was mounted to his left. Arapaho Brown pulled his big gray stallion up on Kitty's right. Chief Henry Two Owls sat his horse to the left of Jeremy. They all had rifles out. The base of the rifle stocks rested on a hip with barrel muzzles pointed skyward. Everyone seems to be off the street that should be. Looks like they got the street barricaded off down at the other end of town, Rapp mused. There's overturned wagons lined up clear across the street. And there's a bunch of men behind them with rifles pointed this way, Cyclone said. He looked to the right and left, his gaze drifting upward. There's men with rifles on the rooftops, spread out along the street on both sides. Watch out for them. A rifle barrel flashed a glint of sunlight from the top of the mercantile just behind the false front. All right, everyone, Cyclone said, taking a deep breath and letting out a sigh. They all grinned at each other. Let's do this. He stuffed his reins into his mouth, pulled his pistol with his Winchester still in his other hand, and spurred his horse forward. Dusters flapped in the breeze as the Wildcat gang galloped forward, guns blazing and thundering. A barrage of fire came from behind the wagon barricade, and men stepped out into the open on the rooftops, with rifles barking. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 men folded and fell to the ground as Wildcat bullets took them down. Others darted back out of sight, taking cover. Flame continued to spit from the rifles behind the barricade as the Wildcats rode onward. Cyclone firing his pistol in one hand while he fired his rifle with the other and recocking one-handed with a snap of the wrist and firing again. The blaring of 6 guns and rifles in the late afternoon merged into a continual roar of thunder beneath the empty blue sky above. It was over almost as soon as it began. The firing ceased, and only silence prevailed with a cloud of gun smoke enshrouding the street like a dense, heavy fog. And when the gun smoke finally drifted away, the Wildcats were still in their saddles, wisps of gun smoke still trailing from rifle and pistol barrels. The outlaws had been vanquished, and the evil banker had met his end. Once again, justice had triumphed in the West, and law and order had been restored. With the lowering of the afternoon sun over the far horizon, Wildcat Kitty, the Cyclone Kid, Jeremy Carlin, Arapaho Brown, and Chief Henry Two Owls rode away, becoming tiny, shadowy specks in the far-off distance. And so it was for the last time in history and the first time in legend, forever, Wildcat Kitty and the Cyclone Kid rode off into the land of the setting sun, where memories live forever and legends never die. This